I remember being in work one day, walking out to my car, and I just felt like I was literally a floating head walking down the walking down the street. I sort of felt like this sensation where I was just going to completely disappear. It just felt like I was just going to just vanish, and that was it. When it was really severe, it felt like, say, for example, if I was holding my phone, I felt like I wasn't holding my phone. Or again, walking, I never felt like I couldn't feel my legs, my feet. Just felt like I was a ghost.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Keelan Murray from Belfast in Northern Ireland. Keelan is 24 years old. His first experience with DP came about after a panic attack during a trip to Liverpool. What followed was an intense battle with daily panic attacks, which resulted in Keelan feeling like he was floating, disconnected, and like a ghost. Over the following 16 months, Keelan frantically searched for a solution, worried that the condition might be permanent or that he might be going crazy. But fortunately, Keelan has since made a complete recovery, and he's with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from DPDR. Keelan, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Sean. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
The pleasure's mine. Keelan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So as I say, as you put very well there, Sean, yes, I'm 24, soon to be 25. Birthday's in a couple of weeks here. So another thing to add to the growing list of things. We've just recently moved house. So that's a whole whirlwind in itself. But it's exciting. It's an exciting time. And we also decided to move in with a puppy as well, 11-week-old puppy. I'll see if I can get a photo up. He's my wallpaper. So that's little, but not so little anymore, Kobe.
Is it Cody, is it?
Kobe, K-O-B.
Kobe.
And yes, I'm from Belfast in Northern Ireland, so not so far away from yourself. And as well as the previous guy you had on, Connor, as well. So it was nice to see that too. But yeah, very exciting to be on. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's all happening at the moment.
It's
so
all
your
happening.
moved house, puppy's getting used to us.
Yeah.
Basically, you're the busiest man in the country at the moment.
I'm the busiest man in this. Yes, without a shadow of a doubt.
Good to hear, man. Good to hear. So, Keelan, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yes, so initially we and my girlfriend decided to go over to Liverpool just for a trip away, and I am quite an anxious person usually. So in terms of like stuff that you can't really control, the likes of planes, I cannot do planes. So we decided to take the boat over, much to her, disregard, because a plane that from Belfast to Liverpool's half an hour, So we decided to get the boat, and we decided to get the overnight boat with no cabin. So we were literally just having to try and find anywhere to sleep. If anyone's been on the sort of similar, short haul boats, you'll know the sort of same situation. So we got there, we landed in Liverpool about 6 o'clock or so. Didn't really sleep that well. Never been on a boat before, so the whole equilibrium was sort of off kilter. Got up there at 6. Obviously, the hotel at check-in doesn't open until about 2 o'clock. So we walked around, had a couple of coffees, and us got a bite to eat, done some shopping, and then just feeling very tired, groggy, overwhelmed, and then finally got to the hotel. So got bags and everything off, ready to go have a nap before going out and maybe getting dinner or something. And all of a sudden, I started to feel like this pain of glass or something, because my girlfriend was speaking to me, and whatever she was saying didn't make sense. I could hear what she was saying, but it didn't make sense to me. And we had we're walking in the rain and stuff as well. So we were carrying shopping, so we're just drenched. And I think loads of different things. Plus it was over COVID too. So I think a whole barrage of worries and stuff sort of culminated. And I felt, this is a little bit strange. And I was like, I feel a wee bit weird. And I felt like a palpitation sort of thing in my chest. So I felt my pulse and my heart was going bang, 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 bang. And first thing came to my head was heart attack. I wish it was panic attack, then I wouldn't have had the whole journey that I've had. But I thought I was having a heart attack, and the sensations were so strong. Like I felt chest pain, I felt out of breath, and I felt like my heart was really going to jump out of my chest. And so I panicked, obviously in a different place altogether than home. So I was like, right, I'm convinced I'm having a heart attack. I can't sleep this off. I went down to the reception, and sort of said to the receptionist, I was pale white with fear, shaking. And I said, I think I'm having a heart attack here, and I don't know what to do. So they brought me into the back. A lovely lady, I think her name was Sharon, in one of the hotels in Liverpool. Absolutely unbelievable, the care that they gave me. But put her Fitbit on my wrist, and my heart rate was like 190. And I looked at that, and that made me worse. So again, as it was over COVID, I was like, right, I'm going to ring myself an ambulance here. 6 hours it was going to take for an ambulance to come, and I was like, no, I need to go to the hospital now, and got an Uber to the hospital, got in, met with the, took me about a couple of hours, but I sort of started to calm down a little bit. Met with the doctor, took an ECG and stuff, checked me over and said, no, your heart's fine. What it is was a very severe panic attack. But I didn't believe that. It might be sort of like a skeptic mind. It's just, I didn't believe it whatsoever. I thought, obviously, with the whole COVID thing going on, and you'd hear stuff in the news and stuff about heart problems and stuff like that. I thought that was me. And whenever it all happened, it's just, I got home, and when I got home, I was sort of, we obviously stayed in Liverpool for a couple of days, and I sort of tried to put it out of my mind, tried to enjoy myself. I had a good couple of good nights there. Got home, and it was still playing in the back of my mind, what if that doctor was wrong? They didn't check this, they didn't check that. So it just created this massive snowball effect. And then eventually went to my own doctor. They checked me out and everything, done bloods, put a heart monitor on me, and I still didn't believe it. Kept worrying, and then throughout all that, kept getting these panic attacks. But the panic attacks I got, I thought were heart problems, if that makes sense. So it just culminated in so much stress. And then eventually, I remember being in work one day, walking out to my car, and I just felt like I was literally a floating head walking down the street, and that frightened me even more. That's when the DPDR started to really take effect. For me, it was a combination of both. When it was really severe, it felt like, say, for example, if I was holding my phone, I felt like I wasn't holding my phone. Or again, walking, I never felt like I couldn't feel my legs, my feet. Just felt like I was a ghost. And then I'm trying to think here. Another major thing was when driving too. If I drove to work, it sort of looked like, the way I sort of put it was you ever see I don't know how to describe it. It's like a play almost, like a 2D set of you may see a Western saloon or something of a play. Yeah. And buildings look like that. And the sky and stuff as well. It was just bizarre to me. It looked like just a 2D set, like a stage performance. And it just frightened me. I couldn't describe it. So if since I was so anxious, what I would do was go on to Google and type in floating feeling, and then it will come up depersonalization. But I was like, no, this isn't it. This must be something else. Whatever has happened to me, maybe it's COVID or something like that. I thought I was, I don't want to say special in a way, but I think it's, especially reading the manual and stuff as well, it seems to be quite common that anyone that experiences this, they think that they're the odd one out, they're the exception. It was the exact same with me. But yeah, it was just a whirlwind, an absolute whirlwind of an experience. But thankfully, thank God, and thank you too, I'm okay
now. Good to hear this, that you've recovered, man. But yeah, that's a stressful situation for sure. And is it so interesting that kind of once you're out of it and you've recovered, you look back on the experience and you say, okay, well, I was an overnight ferry trip. I didn't sleep that well. I was kind of not jet lagged. I was ferry lagged, I tore into cups of coffee, and then I just started kind of noticing my heartbeat, and it kind of spirals from there. But it's really interesting, man, because when I had the experience that set it off for me as well, it was in Amsterdam, and it was in 2005, and it was a bad weed experience, but also it was very similar. I was completely jet lagged because we had flown that morning, so I hadn't slept the night before, and I was, of course, hammering into coffee to wake myself up, because I was like, I'm on holiday, it's time to go, And then of course, and then your body kind of goes so what are you doing there? And you kind of notice your heart's beating a bit more quickly, and then you say, oh Jesus, is something wrong? fair play to Sharon for taking care of you. That's great that you were able to at least kind of find these kind of moments of calm in the experience as well. Yeah. But the things.
Sorry. I was just.
No, go ahead.
I was just, whenever that whole thing happened, I sort of tried to, like, take a back step and sort of think about how would have I have reacted if someone that looked like me came down and was like, you need to help me right now. People might have been like, oh my God, what's going on? But we went back actually after we got back from the hospital, and we got them. It was Sharon, and I can't remember the name of the other. I think it might have been Damien. They just looked after me, and we just got them like a bunch of flowers and some chocolates as a thank you. So yeah, seeing the silver lining in it is good. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, as you say, like, I mean, you look like a man who's not unfamiliar with the gym, like or at least, you look like you're playing some sports, like, and you're 24 years old.
Yeah.
And you present yourself at like the hotel reception saying, I think I'm having a heart attack. And
yeah,
but at the time it seems like, oh, this is happening. This is 100% happening. Yeah.
It's definite fact. Like, yeah.
The thing you mentioned as well, Keelan, about worrying that, like, what if the doctor is wrong, like, and also what was the interesting thing for me as well was, like, when I had the first panic attack in Amsterdam, and then a few weeks later I had the next panic attack at my parents' place, which really set things off for me. But, like, at the time I didn't know what a panic attack was. So it just, to me, kind of felt like I was having these moments where I felt like I was at the edge of going crazy or something terrible was happening. And when I kind of found out that it was a panic attack, there was a part of me that kind of went, that's it, that's the thing. But there was another part of me that was going, like, that can't be it. Like, sure, you don't have panic attacks, Sean. Like, that's not a thing. And also what's something that's kind of really fundamental to panic attacks that people, I think, kind of misunderstand is that, like, the scariest thing about a panic attack is that it appears to have absolutely no cause. Like, there's, like, you're on holiday, like, you're there with your girlfriend, you're there with, like, your buddies or whoever, and you're just kind of having a coffee or whatever, and then suddenly you're like, something is wrong. Oh Jesus, I think I'm going crazy. Something, but it's because you're not, like, if you were being mugged and that happened, you wouldn't come away from the mugging saying, I had a panic attack while I was getting mugged. It's like, well, sure, no, yeah, you didn't. Like, that was your body's natural reaction, but it's because there's no specific trigger for it in your visual field. That's what makes it so frightening. But it can take some time in that narrative to actually look back and say, oh Jesus, yeah, that was a panic attack. Like, it was, I had no frame of reference for this, but that was absolutely a panic attack. Yeah.
The way I sort of try and now, after the whole dealing with it, like, the way I try and frame things now is, like, I try and picture somebody else explaining the same things that I either go through or I've went through. So if one of my friends said to me the exact same thing, was on a boat, had lots of coffee, didn't sleep that well, I'm like, well, I'm surprised he didn't have a panic attack. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of, like, reframing and stuff, it definitely does help. But yeah.
It's something that's really interesting as well, is that, like, there's another interview so by the time this interview comes out, people watching on YouTube, this would have been a previous interview. But I spoke to a young lady in London who describes the exact same thing you just described, Keelan, about feeling like you're in a movie set when you're driving. She literally said that. She's like, it's like I felt like I was watching a movie set go by, like, or feeling like life was a movie set. And it's like the thing of, when you're going through this personally and individually, it feels like, I must be going crazy. This is the most bizarre thing in the world. But kind of then when you, like, speak to people who have this experience, like, the symptoms and the interpretation of the symptoms like that are so common. It's kind of amazing and also very relieving. It's very relieving. It's very relieving to know that, like, a lot of people who get this will have the strong feeling that, like, when they're driving, things don't look real, even though it's such a bizarre symptom at the start. Keelan, can you mentioned a few of them, but Keelan, can you tell us some more about specifically the symptoms you're experiencing? You mentioned the floating head thing and the kind of feeling like you were a ghost, but like, can you tell us more about the mental symptoms and also some of the physical symptoms you might have been experiencing?
Yeah, obviously it's sort of, again, what you sort of mentioned in the manual as well. It's sort of hard to, like, I think you mentioned it as state specific memory. So it is quite hazy in terms of the exacts of how I felt. But like, what I do remember is it felt like speech. I couldn't really understand speech that well when this all happened. And obviously when it started to get better and I had only bouts of DPDR, there was times that I didn't understand speech and it came back. Let's see. Another one was it's hard to think now. It's hard to get back into. There was also like again the driving thing where I just couldn't feel connected to the road or the places around me or people. It was just a whirlwind. Another thing was I sort of felt like this sensation where I was just going to completely disappear. It just felt like I was just going to just vanish and that was it. And that actually it got that bad that I actually convinced myself that I had actually died in Liverpool. Now this is going to sound absolutely mental, but I convinced myself I died in Liverpool, and this whole experience of DPDR was a sense of purgatory, And even speaking that out now, when I feel how I am now, which is completely fine, it sounds so crazy, but whenever you're going through that, it's like 100% fact. And back to what I said before, where whenever you do go through this, you sort of think that like you're the one in a million, you're the exception, and then you're in denial that you're not in a way, So any sort of sensationalization, or if that's even a word, that like if you any sensationalist claims that you make, they sound so true, but in reality they're not, But yeah, the big thing as well, what I found was just the pure incapability to even deal with everyday life. Like, say, for example, if I wanted to go to the shops or something, I found that so overwhelming. And I was constantly on the lookout for DPDR symptoms, the likes of the floating, the likes of feeling disconnected, or a big thing as well was the lighting. Another thing was I sort of found that, like, again, I think it probably due to the dilation of the pupils, as was you mentioned in the manual. It was just it made my vision completely messed up. I remember initially we were in we went for a walk in the park. This was not long after we came back from Liverpool, and I was looking at the street and I realized that I actually said this to my girlfriend. I was like, I can see a lot of that street, like all the way up it. And it freaked me out, It was like I'd never seen it before. I thought they maybe cut down some trees or something that I didn't see. But looking back now, I realized it must have been just my field of vision was so on edge and heightened because of the stress and anxiety levels that I could bring in more sort of light and more information, and that's what it was sort of portraying to me. But yeah, it was yeah. There was actually so much to even touch on. It was just a complete whirlwind of sensations, emotions, and fear as well. It's the fear of going crazy, but yeah. But the good thing is you're not.
Yeah. We mentioned, you mentioned, Keelan, about the vision thing and like seeing more of the street. But in a previous interview I did with Connor, who's from your neck of the woods, I know you saw that as well. He mentioned something about like looking at the landscape and just being completely freaked out by it, and we talked about that, like kind of feeling like you're kind of seeing it in HD and are a bit too much detail, and kind of start to freak out about it and how frightening that can seem. And then once the anxiety passes, you look at that exact same thing and it doesn't bother you at all. The speech thing as well, I absolutely would have had that. It used to particularly freak me out, like the sound of my own voice used to freak me out. And then I would have I would find that I'd be in conversations with people, and that while I was trying to focus on the conversation, I would just start thinking things like, how is information traveling from that person's mouth in through the air into my ears, into my brain, and I'm processing it, and then it's coming out through my mouth, and then and I start thinking about that, and go off on a jolly with that. And then you realize that person's been talking for 30 seconds. You haven't been paying attention. they were literally talking about the weather, and you were off on some existential chat with yourself, you know. Yeah. But when it's happening, you're just kind of like, oh Jesus, there's something, and then you start thinking there's something wrong with your memory, or there's something wrong with your ability to process information. But yeah, focusing on speech was and it's such a simple thing. I mean, it's happening because of your thoughts are racing, you're jumping to scary conclusions. It's difficult to relax, and because your body and brain have deprioritized sitting down and having a chat when it thinks that you are literally in mortal danger. But when you're going through that, you jump to scary conclusions about that same situation. And the exact same thing with trying to make sense of the feelings of disconnection that are happening consistently. So again, these are normal, natural parts of your body and brain's fight or flight response, the feeling of disconnection that you experience. It's referred to in psychology as the airbag for the brain. But when you're experiencing that on an ongoing basis, and you don't know why it's happening, and your rational brain is trying to come up with any explanation as to why you feel like you're in a dream all the time, of course, you're going to jump to conclusions sure, I remember at one point thinking to myself, is it possible that I died in a car crash, and that I'm just kind of roaming the earth now as a spirit, because I feel like I'm in a dream I can't wake up from. And you do, and you try, and that as an explanation, with all of the inherent drama in it, felt like it was more suited to what I was experiencing than a doctor saying, oh, it's just anxiety, even though it was right, But in my mind, I was thinking, this isn't anxiety. I literally feel like I'm not here. That's not anxiety. That's a different thing, you know. And the thing about disappearing as well, it blows my mind how common this is. This is almost a symptomatic. This is for depersonalization what sneezing is for hay fever. It's the most. I hear this from people all the time. I literally made a short film called Disappear that was about a guy convinced that he is going to disappear, in the conversation he has with his psychologist about this. But again, it's just your rational brain frantically and in a panic mode trying to find some sort of explanation for what you're going through, because there is no explanation. It feels like there is no explanation. Which brings me to my next question, Keelan. When you did find out that it was called depersonalization and you found that term, how online first? Oh yeah, so you mentioned it, the feeling of floating. You typed into Google and you found it.
Yeah.
When you found the term, when you found the name Keelan, how did that change it for you? Did it kind of give you a sense of relief, or did it kind of send you down a rabbit hole of research, or did you speak to a specialist or a therapist, or what happened at that point?
It was a bit of both. When I initially found it, the more I read about it, and I actually came across your videos as well, which were fantastic. The more I read about it, the more it sort of made sense. But the more it made sense, I was still in denial, you know? So for me, it was sort of like a stage of, I said to myself, right, I'm going to do all the research I can to try and outweigh the denial, if that makes sense, to sort of stack evidence against it, which wasn't the best idea, because that led me to forums, that led me to just watch videos about it days and days on end. And it was quite sort of counterproductive, because it took me far too long to realize this, where there's anxiety and DP are interlinked. They're not sort of separate things, as you mentioned in the manual, where I think it's in the pep talk that you said, you know, they're not, don't care what anybody says, they're not separate things, they're one and the same. I tried to focus on getting rid of the DP rather than getting rid of the anxiety for so long, because everything I researched and stuff, and especially the forums and stuff and the likes of Reddit, brought it in such a bad light. They said it was just a horrible thing, and it was just like that we were sick, but it wasn't the case at all. Like you mentioned before about the trip to Amsterdam, about like a bad weed experience and stuff. I've had the same a couple of years ago, and this is way before the DP stuff, where I had a bit of weed. I don't smoke, tobacco or anything, and tried a bit of weed, and it just sent me on what I didn't know. I didn't even know it was a panic attack, but the fact that I didn't, focus on it, and the fact that obviously I had the same sort of DP symptoms, were floating, not here, going to disappear and stuff. But I got home, slept it off, and then I was fine. But I didn't focus on it. I sort of laughed it off, Whereas maybe if I was in a different headspace, like I was in Liverpool, having those same symptoms and focusing on it, then it would have just let itself grow. But yeah, in terms of finding it, but your videos were such a godsend, honestly. Like, and the more I looked at it, and the more you said about it, and the more different videos I watched, and especially these story videos too, of people coming on and saying the same thing, because it's okay reading it in black and white and reading one person's view on it, but when you have so many people coming and saying the same things, it's so reassuring to let you know that you're not going crazy, that it's so common. And I think it's, what is it, one in four people, or one in three people or something, will experience it in their lifetime. So yeah, it's very reassuring.
Yeah. I think it's estimated that I think it's up to 75% of people will experience DP or DR at some point in their lives, in its transient form, because again, it's part of your body and brain's correct response to stress, anxiety, and trauma, and just about everyone will experience stress, anxiety, and trauma at some point in their lives. Then just like any other anxiety-based condition, what can happen is we focus on one of the symptoms of the panic when it happens, and then it turns into a feedback loop. But that's interesting what you mentioned, Keelan, about initially trying to get rid of the DPDR rather than the anxiety, and that's absolutely what I did first as well, when I kind of figured out, or when I learned what it was that I thought that. And it's a mistake that people very, very commonly make, but you think that the symptoms you're experiencing are an obstacle course, so that you have to sort out the feeling disconnection first, then you need to sort out the visual stuff, then you need to sort out the worry of going crazy, then you need to sort out the fear that you're in purgatory, and then you need to sort out the memory issues, and then you need to sort out and it just feels I remember at the start, I was just I felt like I was looking up at the peak of Mount Everest going, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Because
it's from oh, sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, it's a bit like the sort of analogy I had for it was, there's a fire in your house and the smoke alarm's going off, and you're trying to turn off the smoke alarm rather than put out the fire. It's just, it's so counterproductive in terms of doing that. But yeah, especially what you said about you're looking up at that Mount Everest and you're like, how am I going to deal with floating, disconnection, driving, not being able to drive, not being able to go out for walks and stuff. Whereas if we focus on another thing, with the actual direct thing that's causing it, it'll be so much easier dealt with, definitely.
Yeah, and it feels counterintuitive to do that, because the anxiety, first of all, there's a part of you that says that kind of disbelieves that it's anxiety, because you're but I felt anxiety before. I felt anxiety before exams and things but I literally feel my vision is damaged. I feel like I am a ghost. I feel like I'm a head floating around. This, I didn't have this when I was doing my college entrance exams. What's going on? This can't just. So there's a part of you that kind of thinks geez, but what if it's something different? What if it's worse? And then there's also the kind of idea that that it almost feels like it makes more sense to address it as a series of smaller problems, because at least that kind of gives you it feels like a kind of a blueprint for attacking it. Whereas if you think to yourself, well, I just need to address the anxiety feels like it's very fluid and kind of non-specific. So how do I address anxiety? And of course there's proven techniques to use this and recover, of course. But at the start, it can often feel well, so you're telling me that I need to stop trying to focus on the visual problems I'm experiencing, which are happening now. And you're telling me to not focus on that, but to focus on this kind of totally fluid thing that I can't understand and I'm not even quite sure is the problem. So there can be a kind of a period of time in which we take our focus away from the things that are actually causing it to persist, which are, constantly checking on these different symptoms, and actually focus on the engine that's causing those symptoms to happen, which is the anxiety,
Definitely.
Yeah. So Keelan, what was your lowest point in the whole experience? Is there any moment in particular that sticks with you?
There's one sort of time that that sort of sticks out in my memory. I was actually driving. Obviously, as I said before, I work from home most of the day. So there was a time I was driving back from my girlfriend's house, back home to work, and just everything was racing through my head. This was maybe like 5 months after Liverpool. During that time, I'd been to the doctor, and they were like, "Oh, I think we might talk about this before. Oh, you might be like with it's anxiety, but maybe a little bit of depression as well. Give me these antidepressant tablets," which just made me 10 times worse because I wasn't depressed, and it was just everything was running through my mind, and then I was stuck in traffic, and all of a sudden this huge panic attack came on, where my entire arms went numb, tingly, and stuff. And again, first thing in my head was a heart attack. I was constantly in that sort of loop, and I was debating pulling the car over and just getting out, but I said, no, listen, I'll plow on. Got home, still shaking up, and I just sort of broke down. And I rang my mum, who was working at the time, so I couldn't work. Got her to come over and sort of stay with me. I'm a big guy, so I was a sitting blubbering mess with my mum, like a child. But yeah, and then just from that day on, I was like that. This is the lowest of the low it can get. There's no lower than this, because I literally thought that there's things racing through my mind at that time where this is it. This is me for life. I was sort of catastrophizing and just thinking the complete worst of everything, to be honest. But yeah, in a way, I'm sort of thankful for all of this to happen too, and to have that as a reference point. Because, as I say, in terms of moving house, it's stressful. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, listen, I've been through the worst of the worst in my mind. So anything that comes along now is sort of, I compare it to that, and it's nowhere near that. So silver linings.
Silver linings for sure. How actually, that's another question I wanted to ask you, was how was it speaking to doctors and therapists, and like before and after you found the term depersonalization? Were you able to were people able to identify it, or what was it like describing the symptoms to them?
Well, I initially went to the doctor, the family doctor. He was fantastic. Like, he was very, very. He's recently retired. But I went to him and I explained, like, listen, I feel like I'm floating. And there's a couple of symptoms I actually remember saying to him, where I was in waiting to get my hair cut in the barbers, and I looked at the chairs, and the chairs looked too far apart, and that gave me a panic attack. But it was the visual symptoms creating the sort of the thoughts and feelings. So I said that to him, and he says, "No, listen, it's anxiety. It's 100% anxiety. Listen, it's hard. It's so difficult. But I promise you now, there's A, nothing wrong with your heart, which was the main worry, and B, all these symptoms are to do with anxiety." But again, going back to that sort of like thought pattern of, it can't be. I've dealt with anxiety. I've had exams. I've been anxious before, like, first dates and stuff as well, or like stuff like that. But yeah, like, this is not anything I've ever experienced. So I disregarded it. But the more I sort of researched and learned about it, and the more, I came to terms with it, it made so much more sense, But to be fair to the doctor, and I think you mentioned it in the manual as well, he's 100% right. It is anxiety. He might not have known, okay, this is DPDR, this is the depersonalization, derealization, this is what's going to happen. Once you deal with anxiety, it'll go away. But he was right in a sense. It's just I thought he was, brushing me off, which wasn't the case, But yeah, he's definitely right.
But great to hear this. He immediately kind of understood or explained the symptoms you were describing. Because especially when you get into stuff like visual changes, there's a part of you that kind of thinks like, okay, we're getting this sounds bad, like things don't look right. We're getting into some very like potentially like dark territory there. But for a doctor to say like, no. That's, you're describing anxiety. That's okay. Even if there is a sense of like, are you sure it's anxiety? But for a doctor to have that reaction of like, just because so much of the there's so much value in somebody hearing what you're describing and just saying like, yeah. No, you're to a T. You're just describing even the visual stuff, and the visual stuff, and the focus stuff, and the memory, all that stuff too, you're ticking boxes, So that's great that you were able to have that with the family GP.
I went to him and said all that, and I actually said to him, I'm afraid it might be a brain tumor as well because of the visual changes. And I think you mentioned this before as well in a couple of your videos about getting your eyes tested. I went to get my eyes tested maybe 2 or 3 times because I was convinced. And every time, like, there was a place beside my work, and I went to the opticians, and I was like, "Can you test my eyes?" And I was waiting to hear back here. There might be something wrong or something like that. They're like, "Oh, your vision's fine. You don't even need prescription glasses." And I'm like, "Oh, like there must be something wrong." So then again, I went to the local opticians, and again, I was like, "Oh, I need a second.
Get a second opinion."
They were like, "Oh no, it's fine." I was like, "It's fine." But that's wasted money.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing. There's nothing wrong with you. I'm getting a second opinion.
And when I mentioned to him about the brain tumor stuff as well, because obviously the visual changes and stuff like that. Plus, like if you Google like brain tumor or something like that, it says behavioral changes. And I was thinking, well, I'm afraid to go out of the house. I can't really go for a drive anymore. That's behavior. So I looked at it, and the first thing he said to me was, no, it's not. Do you have headaches? No. Do you have seizures? No. Then it's not, completely. But yeah. So wasted money on opticians. Money I'll never get back, but sure.
But you were customer of the month there, though. They had a picture of you up on the wall, like.
Should have given me a loyalty card or something.
Yeah, there's little stamps on it, like, your 10th eye test is free.
Yeah. Like a coffee, it's like
yeah. Oh my god, that's a scream. It's something that's very again, we kind of realize after we recovered, but like I was like absolutely sure at different points in my time with DPDR and anxiety that like I had dementia, I had schizophrenia, I had multiple personality disorder, I had a brain tumor, and I was certain at different points that these things were happening. I was certain, like I was like, yeah, that's it, that's got to be it. And then it's like, if you kind of look up the symptoms of these conditions, they're very, very obvious. Like they're very clear, and they're not just clear to like a doctor, but like they're clear to your family and friends. There are clear, definite behavioral changes. There are things you cannot continue to do if you display these changes. And also, like if you go to a doctor and you have any of these conditions, they are trained to spot the symptoms of them very, very quickly. So, but anxiety just kind of, thing is like anxiety is not interested in evidence. Anxiety isn't really interested in like the fact that, you're not, that like there's no like massive issue with your memory if you describe like something that happened like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But if you're having trouble focusing on a conversation, anxiety points at it and says, that's dementia. That's dementia. Are you sure? I'm 25 years old. Oh yeah, that's dementia, definitely. Like, I went to my GP last week and they said I was fine. Yeah, I don't know. Could be dementia. And that's anxiety's job. It's anxiety's job to do that. And it's helpful if you're in a situation where you're actually in physical danger where you could die, but you're not. You're absolutely not. It's just happening at the wrong time.
Just on that, Sean, we're sort of in that frame of thinking. I can't remember where I read it. I can't even remember off the top of my head, but a brilliant bit of advice or like guidance. What I seen was, if you think to yourself, you're not very good at predicting the future. If you were, say everything that you predicted is right, you've had every single disease under the sun. You've you're a ghost, you're this, you're that. At a certain point in time, you have to sort of come to acceptance that you're pretty crap at predicting things. That's the be all and end all of it. Why would you waste the effort in something that you're not good at? Why don't you put your time and energy into something you're good at, But that I can't remember where I read it, to be honest with you, but that there sort of put it in a different light to me, it's sort of a different framing, which I felt helped as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I also always refer to Occam's razor, which is like the all things being equal, the simplest explanation is the most likely. And it's like, so if you're going through these symptoms, one explanation is, well, I died in a car crash that I can't remember, and now I'm a purgatorial spirit floating the spiritual planes. Or panic attack, or I had a panic attack because I smoked too much weed, and these are the symptoms of anxiety.
Yeah.
So no, I don't know, but
yeah, you're like, what's that?
Yeah, what exactly? But that's kind of it as well. Is that like the drama of the first option feels like it's more consistent with the intensity of what you're experiencing. Because you're like, because I mean, I think I say this in the book at some point, but like if somebody had like said to me when this first started, if someone had said like, Sean, what you're experiencing is anxiety, like I would have laughed, I would have laughed at them, because I would have said you may as well say this is a broken leg. This has nothing to do with anxiety. What I'm experiencing, like I have felt anxiety before in the past. I've felt intense anxiety. I thought I did. But this is different. But the thing is, like, yeah, it is different, but it's still anxiety. It's just a more intense level of anxiety. It's fight or flight anxiety that's happening consistently around the clock. And that is, it's not dangerous, but it's frightening to go through. And that is different from the anxiety that you feel on a first date, or I'm going to do your exams or whatever. Yeah. But it's fascinating that like it's the intensity of the experience makes us gravitate towards explanations that are more dramatic, and feel like they make more sense. But as we recover, we get that perspective back and we look at it and we say, oh yeah, no, the simplest explanation is the most likely. The simplest explanation is it was anxiety, and I actually wasn't a ghost, like, so.
Just plain old anxiety. There you go. That's it.
Plain old anxiety. Can I get my money back from the optometrist? Like,
walk past have to sort of do that now,
yeah. With sunglasses, like, Sunglasses, So Keelan, with all that said, how did your recovery start, and how did that process begin for you?
It was very slow. If I could go back in time and sort of reprioritize my thoughts and my attention, it would have been so much quicker. Again, I think I reached out to you before as well. Must have been like last year, where I thought I completely recovered. So the way it sort of felt for me was, the floating feeling was persistent. Say, for example, if I was walking into the car, I would, as soon as I shut the door, I'd be like, oh, I hope I don't feel weird walking into the car. And as soon as I'd done that, I felt weird. You know what I mean? That sort of pink elephant thing. But it sort of came to a time where I didn't feel a little bit weird anymore. I didn't feel like I was floating. But then it would come back maybe in a day or so, and then all of a sudden my self-esteem and my like motivation would just be completely down, But for me as well, whenever I eventually did find out through the help of the manual, and was about focusing on the anxiety itself. So mine was through a lot of health anxiety, and especially my heart. So the thing I remember having this panic attack once, and I was like, right, this is the end. This is it. No more. I have to address this. So what I done was just went into the gym and done intense cardio. Now, I'm not the smallest person in the world. It was a lot of hard work, and it wrecked me, but I actually started boxing training as well, which from that and the exercise and the intense cardio, it sort of gave me that that feeling that, your heart's fine, and there was a direct correlation between those feelings of DP disappearing and the more exercise. And again, that sort of, that balancing weight of evidence, the more I had of that, the less the DP was, And for me now, at the minute, it's just about keeping that up and maintaining that sort of that sort of balance. I think as well, Connor mentioned, who's a previous guest on, he said he still feels a little bit of DP, but it doesn't affect him in the same way. Mine's the exact same, because I remember a couple of weeks ago, I wasn't well. I must have had something like a chest infection or something, and I felt a little bit of DP, but I straight away knew what it was, and it was fine. I didn't focus on it. It didn't bring me down the same way, and but yeah, in terms of recovery, the biggest thing that as well that I found was the correct knowledge of what DPDR is. The main thing I got from that was the manual. So during those cardio sessions, what I used to do was stick on the pep talk and just hammer it out as best I can. Because what I used to do was I would have got this, this bravery to get on, do a bit of treadmill, do a bit of boxing or something, and then I would have felt a little bit of, palpitation. DP came on, and then I got scared and went home. But with that pep talk, it sort of motivated me to stay there because I know what these feelings are. Like there comes a time when you've been feeling them for a year and a half. You're not gonna. You thought you were going to disappear the first time that you had them. You're certainly not going to disappear a year and a half into them. So yeah, thanks be to God and you, as I said before, that I'm a lot better. I'm recovered now, because if I do feel those symptoms, or if I do feel them, they don't bother me anymore. And it sort of came to a stage where I'll probably have like in a month, I probably have 28 days of no DPDR, and then maybe a couple of days of an hour or so here and there. But that is nothing, completely nothing. And that's not to scare any, because people may hear this and they may be where I was a year and a half ago, being like, well, I want this to completely go away. But the mechanisms of it are there to protect you. And if you were to get rid of them, that doesn't make you a human, But if you go through an intense traumatic experience, you will experience DPDR. But part of the recovery process is learning exactly what it is used for in a normal sense, and the mechanisms of how it disappears once you get past it. So focusing on it and dwelling on it and creating it and making that the cause of your anxiety is so counterproductive, and it took me so long to find that out and realize that I won't get that year and a half back. But the best thing I can do now is to make the most of things going forward. Because before I was like, I didn't like to go on holidays and stuff. I mentioned before about the fear of flying and stuff. Me and my girlfriend went to Nice, in the south of France, there a couple of months ago, and it was beautiful, like good. But I wouldn't have done that before, So yeah, it's all about sort of what in my recovery now and going out of it. The big thing for me is just making the most out of life. Because I know what it's like to be at very rock bottom, where you can't even do the smallest of things, like go to the shop, like go for a drive or go for a walk or go to the gym and actually enjoy it. So yeah, just now is just making the most of life and being happy, which is the biggest thing.
That's great, man. The thing you mentioned about having days where while you're on the road to recovery, you have days where it's there and it fades away, and then you have like 2 days where it's kind of okay, it's kind of going, and then you have a day where the anxiety pops back, and those days feel so demoralizing because you think, oh Christ, like I was doing so well, like, and now this is back, and as you said, your self-esteem drops,
Yeah.
But it's a part of recovery is that, like, it's remembering that it's never a smooth curve. Like it's the stock market all the way down, but over a long time scale, or even it can be a short time scale. It is dropping down, but you're going to have peaks and troughs in that time.
Yeah. Well, sorry. You referenced that. I think it's in the manual as well, where there's like a graph, and if you look at it, there's ups, downs, ups, downs. But if you zoom out, it's as you say, the stock market is consistently down. And sorry, there's another thing that sort of came to mind in terms of recovery, where I remember it must have been a month or two after Liverpool, I had a week off. And I think you mentioned in the book as well, where if you sit and wait for that non-anxiety day to come, it'll never come. So I had a week off, and all I did was lie in bed and wait to feel better. And then one day rolled into the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, where I'd done nothing. And the day came to go back to work, and I had a severe panic attack because of it, because it was just, I was waiting to get rid of this feeling, but I had the power to get rid of it, if that makes sense, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When we have these, like if we have like a lot of time to ourselves, like counterintuitively and unfortunately, that can create the space for us to fill it up with anxiety. Whereas, you know, if you had been like straight back to work, like, I mean, if I'd been in college, like when it happened to me, and I had to go straight back to a lecture at 9 o'clock on Monday morning after Amsterdam, like, I mean, I don't, like, you know, but I went home and I had the time, and I was like, I put everything else aside, and I was like, everything needs to stop until I sort this out. But what you're actually doing inadvertently is you're creating a load of space for the anxiety to take up, and it will take all the space you give it. It's really interesting about going back to the gym as well, Keelan, considering that like so much of this had stemmed from a kind of the hyper awareness of your heart and palpitations. So I presume that was kind of part of that decision as well, was that like you go in and actually push yourself, like was it to kind of prove to yourself that this was possible?
Yeah, it was, because obviously whenever I got back from Liverpool, I had lots of different tests and stuff done where they constantly told me, same sort of thing with the eyes, like, you know, your heart's fine. So again, I was probably the doctor's worst customer, because I just kept coming back with a heart test and stuff. But I sort of came to the realization where, you know, there's only so much sort of reassurance you can get. You're going to have to prove to yourself, you know. And I'm not going to lie, like the first couple of sessions were scary, because you're still in that sort of mindset where, oh, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my body, with my heart. If I push myself too hard, I might have a heart attack, or I might do this, I might do that. Where when you actually do it and you're like, oh, I'm fine, you know, it's it's probably the same sort of thing as like exposure therapy, you know. See, it's tried and tested as a method of anxiety relief and anxiety cure. It seems sort of thing. If say for example someone's like a fear of elevators, first thing you do is make them look at an elevator, get in an elevator, you know, and then eventually over time that sort of decreases the stress and anxiety of that. And the same sort of thing with especially with DP as well, in terms of going for walks and going outside as well. The more you do it, the more you get used to it, the less scary it becomes, because you know there's nothing wrong. And if you've been doing it, in my case, for, well, I was what, 22 or 23 when I initially felt the DPDR. I've been doing walks and stuff since I was what, 2 or 3 years old, like, you know. So so the evidence is there that I can do that, you know.
Yeah. The what a great thing to do, to just kind of push past that fear. And the thing as well, going to the gym, like I was the exact same, because I wasn't like big into exercise or kind of going to the gym, and then it was actually a friend that dragged me along to it, and he was just like, you have to get out of the house, you have to, you know. And it was at the time I was like, it may as well have been going to Mars, like, you know, because it was just like bright lights, people, you know, machines, like, I can't do this, like, you know. But then you start to do it, and it's that thing of like every anxious cell in your body is saying like, get out and go home, because you're not safe, you know. And this is just going to get worse, like, you know. And the thing is that I don't want to say if you give into it, because that's kind of too defeatist, but like if you agree with that and you pack up your stuff and go home, even if it's just for the night, but if you pack up and kind of leave like half an hour early because like, this is too much, it is giving the anxiety a credence, and it's giving it a sense of purpose, and it's communicating to your brain that the anxiety is so important that it gets to determine your decisions and your routine and your rhythm. And the more that you give that, even with the best of intentions, the more it will take. So the next time you go to the gym, you are still asking yourself that decision, or that question. You're saying, well, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. Could I go home? I went home yesterday, so I'd be grand, like, you know.
Yeah.
But then if you see it out, if you see out that hour and a half at the gym or whatever, and you come home, then a box has been ticked in your brain that says like, that anxiety that you felt, pointless. It was pointless. It didn't need to be there. Nothing bad happened. You're feeling better. The endorphins are going. You look good. You sleep better afterwards. it's just, it's all positives, but there is that kind of like thing of pushing through the anxiety that's saying like you're not safe, you need to go home, and ignoring it and saying, no, I don't need this anymore.
Yeah, there's a fantastic video on YouTube I'd recommend if anyone wants to watch it. It's the actor Jim Carrey. I probably pronounced his last name wrong. Jim Carrey from The Mask. Bruce Almighty. He is given some, I think it's like a graduation talk for some university in the United States. I think it's MUM University. But one of the key it's about 20 minutes long, but it's fantastic in terms of like the situations he touches on. But one of the key messages he portrays is so many people do things out of fear disguised as practicality. So you're the same, that thing you said, that example you gave about the gym, you're like, oh, but no, you might do this or you may feel this way, so let's just go home where it's safe. Disguising it as, practicality, where it's just fear. And it's the anxiety trying to, disguise itself as something else to get you to do what it wants. And until you, as you say, push through it, then you will be stuck in the same sort of, merry-go-round that I was on for so long,
Yeah. I think I've seen that talk. It's really, really good. The thing you mentioned as well, Keelan, about experiencing moments of DP, and Connor mentioned this in the interview as well. And Connor's getting a load of shout outs. He's going to but the thing of like having brief moments of DP and DR, but thinking about them differently is like, you kind of get to the realization that, like, again, 75% of people will experience this. Like, it's extremely common. But what's fascinating is that, like, people who haven't gone through depersonalization disorder, like, regularly experience moments of DP and DR. They might be stressed out at work. They mightn't have slept properly the night before. They might be jet lagged. They might be feeling nervous about a presentation at work the next day, whatever, but they'll feel moments of anxiety. And in the same way that your heart might beat a bit more quickly for a while, you might experience feelings of depersonalization, derealization, transient for a while. But because they're not primed to kind of look out for it, it's just something they kind of go, oh yeah, that, but then they get back to watching EastEnders, they just get back to doing what they were doing. So people who have never experienced depersonalization disorder experience DP and DR all the time, but they just aren't primed to look out for. But part of recovery from the condition is that you get that understanding in a literal sense, and you can actually identify it. So you could, even if that's going from a non-verbal thing of just like, oh, I felt a bit weird, like to a thing of like, oh yeah, there's that thing. But the difference being that if it ever happens again, you can say, geez, I'm actually under a bit too much stress at the moment, so I'm going to switch to decaf for a day or two. I'm going to go for a jog, and I'm going to have a cup of chamomile tea when I get back. As opposed to when it happened the first time, and I thought, oh, I'm going crazy. I died in a car crash, and it's just a different interpretation of what is a normal and common and completely harmless symptom of anxiety. This just about everybody experiences,
I love whatever you said about the tea and stuff and the decaf, because I love my coffee, and I remember seeing somewhere like
lakes of coffee.
The beautiful thing about recovery as well is you can have coffee and you understand the symptoms that you may have, but you don't associate it with that catastrophization. Whereas, man, I had peppermint tea on the go, I had decaf and stuff, and it just made me miserable. That is like a black coffee, no sugar, nothing, and I was having peppermint tea, chamomile tea, all that stuff, and that was while I was smiling. But just something that sort of came to my mind there, that just came to my memory, that what you mentioned about how people sort of experience that DP transiently and don't even associate anything with it. I don't know. This is the first time that I sort of came to this realization. Years and years and years ago, like when I was a teenager and stuff, I used to have this sort of, and I didn't know what it was, but I never really worried about it. In big crowds and stuff, I used to get this lightheadedness feeling. and I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. Never once thought it was something horrible or scary or anything like that. But say, for example, if I was in town or something in the shopping centre, there's a lot of people, and I used to get this sort of lightheaded, floaty feeling, exactly what sort of DP is. But as soon as I went into a shop, it went away, and I never really thought about it that much. I completely forgot about that until you mentioned that there now. So you see, and then that's sort of what I'm experiencing now. If I do, have that sort of, lightheadedness feeling, it doesn't bother me in the slightest because I know what it is. So there's a beauty in knowing what it is and knowing exactly how to deal with it, and also not caring about it at all. So it's that bit in the middle, where you're so worried about it. There is, once you get to that other side, that you know what it is, and you know it's harmless, and you know it won't hurt you. And again, the more you experience it, the more knowledge you have of it. So that, again, that evidence sort of outweighs it. You know it's not going to do anything, and it's hard to do, and hard to come to terms with. But it's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the great things about recovery is that from any anxiety-based condition is that you now have this experience under your belt, and you have this, because most people will have some experience with anxiety-based and anxiety condition at some point in their lives, or if it's a panic attack or a series of panic attacks or something, most people will encounter something like that. And that's okay. It's perfectly normal. But to get the experience of an intense time with an anxiety-based condition under your belt, it gives you such a comprehensive frame of reference for these symptoms, so that if you ever encounter them again, and we're all going to go through situations and times that are stressful and to work relationships, that it is what it is, but that we are now primed to identify these things if they ever pop up again, and just simply the understanding of what they are takes the potential for catastrophizing away. There's that phrase that says anxiety is caused by the fear of anxiety. Panic attacks are caused by the fear of panic attacks. Depersonalization is caused by the fear of depersonalization. So if you've gone through an intense experience with these three things and have come out the other side and understood what they are and why they happen, it changes your relationship with anxiety and stress completely, because you are seeing it from a practical point of view now, and you're not pointing at it and jumping to the conclusion that something is terribly, terribly wrong because you feel a momentary sensation disconnection, or because a momentary increase in your heartbeat. It doesn't mean you're going to die. It doesn't mean you're going to go crazy. It's the normal cut and thrust of being a human being,
Yeah, I don't know about you, Sean, if you experience this too, but the thing I've noticed as well after going through all this, any trivial things that I was worried about don't faze me anymore. Like the likes of, if I have to do a presentation in work, or if I have to go for a meeting or something like that, I don't care in the slightest. But did you find that as well? Like any sort of trivial things after you've recovered, you start to how to put this, you don't think the worst of them anymore after being through this. Was that similar to yourself?
Yeah, very much so. And also something I found as well was that if I ever had kind of things that were that would have been bigger in the past, I don't know, kind of I work in film, for example, so working on kind of certain projects would have kind of really stressed me out, but having the reference for having gone through something like that it gives me the perspective of thinking that film is it's fun. It's fun. It's just, there's of course there's a lot of kind of work around it, but the goal of it is fun. And I think that before going through anxiety and DP, my opinion about those types of things would have been very kind of entangled with stress, and with a sense of oh, I have to accomplish something, or I have to kind of reach A, B, and C. Whereas I am a lot less likely to jump to kind of large catastrophic conclusions, not just catastrophic, but kind of just silly conclusions about things like that. after having gone through something like anxiety and DP and DR. And also, if you found this as well, Keelan, but like it really, really gave me a strong sense of empathy with people who were going through anything like that. Because I think prior to that, like when I was a much younger man, I think I had a very kind of simplistic approach to mental health. I mean, just because I was an idiot, like, you know, but I would have thought, like, you know, if you're feeling depressed, like, or anxious, just, you know, just stop it, like, you know, just fix it, you know. And then when you go through it and you kind of run the gauntlet of realizing that, like, or thinking that, like, I don't know if I could be fixed. I don't know if there's anything can help me. I don't know what caused this, and I'm stuck in this. It really gives you a sense of humility and empathy for people who are going through similar experiences.
Yeah, exactly the same. Like, again, when I was like teenager and stuff, like I sort of thought, you know, half of the sort of, you see people like, oh, they're depressed and stuff like this. In the back of your mind, you're like, sometimes you're maybe doing it for attention or something like that. But that's just being an arsehole, you know, whenever you're younger. But now it's just like, I could never, if you would have told me maybe, you know, when I was 18 that I was going to go through this, I'd be like, no, like I'm Jack the Lad, like, you know, nothing will do that to me. And it was just the entire, like, even talking about it, like, it gets me a bit emotional, but like, you completely lose going through that. You just completely lose who you were as a person. And if 18-year-old me said to me when I was going through that, oh, you're doing it for attention, I would have kicked him in the next week. You know, it's because it's completely wrong. And yeah, especially after going through this, as you said, the empathy and stuff that I have now for people going through the same is just, yeah, I just completely agree with you, mate. Definitely.
Yeah. And also it's something I say to people, because generally the people who I speak to or who go through things like this, it tends to happen in the late teens and or in early 20s, sometimes in 30s as well. But it's actually, in a way, it's actually a good thing, because to go through that experience at a younger age gives you it gives you that toolkit to have going forward for the rest of your life, because you are bound to have stressful times and experiences, as mentioned, relationships, work, and all the rest of it, as you know, as in the rest of existence. But to have that toolkit at an early age is actually beneficial, you know. And you can, and I think you can to some extent, you can only really have it through experience. Like you can read everything you want about it, but there is something about actually going through it and having that kind of being curled up on the ground crying as a 25-year-old man. Like, I was thinking, well, that's it, my life's over. There's something about that that kind of changes your perspective, but also gives you a frame of reference that rewards you through the rest of your life. I mean, I'm 41 now, and like I still, not that I would kind of refer to the experience specifically, but I know that it has given me a strength and an empathy for dealing with like day-to-day anxieties and stresses that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Yeah. So I also am thankful in a way that I went through it, you know. Although 25-year-old me would kick me into next week for saying that. I'd be like, thankful. What are you on about?
Yeah, it's hard. And again, people may be watching this and they're like, "What? That exact same sort of thing." You know what? Like, I will not. I want this gone forever. But once you get over it, you'll understand. And I trust me and trust you. You will. But just on that thing about what you said about having this sort of thing in your early 20s, and you've probably talked to more people that have this than anyone. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's that sort of transition period after like university, or something like that, where you're sort of entered into like adulthood and you're like, oh, the different sort of stresses about, you know, having to be an adult after being a kid for all your life and stuff, you know? Do you think that's sort of why it is?
All those things, yeah. Also the fact that, and this is probably like outside of my outside of my wheelhouse, but in general, people tend to encounter anxiety-based conditions around, more so kind of clustered around that age. It can happen at any time in life, but it tends to happen more commonly around kind of late teens, early 20s, and sometimes into the 30s. But I would say, yeah. I mean, it's a time of change. It is kind of moving into adulthood. It is like a change in who you are. It's a change in responsibilities. It's going to college. For a lot of people, and me included, it's messing around with drugs in college, and that's not a criticism or anything like that. But this is one of the risks that happens with psychoactive drugs, is that it can trigger anxiety. It's just something that happens. But it is a time at which I think environmentally and mentally people are more susceptible to find themselves in situations where they can panic or kind of jump to frightening conclusions. I think maybe to some degree that kind of maybe solidifies a bit as you get older, and you get a sense of kind of not community, but kind of sense of solidity around you, and just kind of maybe having a place to live, or like having a job and kind of a solid income and all the rest of it. But maybe just because teenagehood and early adulthood is such a time of flux, that maybe that can contribute towards to spells of anxiety or panic attacks and such. Yeah. Keelan, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
As I mentioned before, I was sort of in this period where I'd recovered a bit, but not completely. Where every day that I didn't have it, I thought, brilliant, that's me completely done with it. I'm over it. And then again, when I had a day or a feeling like that, I just collapsed in on myself. I thought, right, this is me back to square one again. And I'm the great skeptic, as I've told. I don't. If someone tells me the sky's blue, I'll believe it's red. So I see everybody, like all the comments and all the things, that how the DP manual was brilliant and it helped them so much. And there was a time where I had felt a lot of DP, and I thought, right, this has to stop. This is it now. I was like, surely these people can't be wrong. You know what I mean? And surely Sean is, he hasn't made this for nothing, and he it has to work. So I bought it. It must have been like 4 o'clock in the morning when I bought it, because I was sort of sitting there tossing and turning, mind going 100 miles an hour. And so I read it the next morning and stuff, and then went to the gym, put on the pep talk, and I thought, wow, like everything that you're talking about and you're saying, I knew from the videos and stuff too, a lot of it sort of like resonated. But especially that sort of pep talk was just like, it was a godsend, and especially today, like if I'm going to the gym or something and feeling like a little bit, I can feel that sort of anxious thought enter my mind, and about the DP and stuff as well. I stick that on, and then it just makes perfect sense, but yeah, I read it, and every single word of it just hit the nail on the head. And the biggest thing for me was the educational use of it, to understand exactly what it is, because if you're getting your education of DP through forums and stuff, it's as you say in the book, those people have probably been on those forums for 10 years, and they believe that they're sick, and they believe that, that sometimes they may wear it of like a sort of badge of honor, whereas it shouldn't be like that, but yeah, it was just brilliant. And take that from me, I am the great skeptic, I'm the guy that got 1 million eye tests, so but yeah, if you're in doubt about it, like it's brilliant. I think I'll have it for the rest of my life, so yeah, thank you so much for that, honestly.
That's great, man. Of course, man. That's great. I'm so happy to hear that. And yeah, it's interesting what you say about the forums because I think somebody said this to me recently, maybe one of the other interviews, but they said that like all of the, like if you look at the forums and look at the websites that talk about this, and even social media groups, all of the best information points in the same direction.
Yeah,
it all says the same thing, because it's actually quite well understood. Like, but it's just that there is so much like white noise around it when you get into the forums, because like if you go into a forum that's talking about like claustrophobia or agoraphobia, like, you know, anything, of course you're going to get conflicting opinions. That's just the nature of public discussion. But that's not helpful when you're trying to figure it out, especially at first. But it is interesting that like all of the best information points in the same direction and actually says the same thing. So hopefully as time goes by, that white noise will be reduced, as it is with let's say agoraphobia, for example. Okay, there is white noise around it, but like there's not much like compared to depersonalization, because, you know, the symptoms are more varied and more difficult to describe. But hopefully we'll get to a point soon where the amount of white noise around it is lessened, and when people develop this condition, they are much more quickly pointed in the right direction towards understanding what it is. Because the sooner you understand it, and you can start to put a label on it and start to make a plan for recovery. So now that you've recovered, Keelan, what's recovery like? Is life back to normal? Well, as we said, you are the busiest man in the country, like, so it must
be. Yeah, I think you touched on it a little bit before. We sort of discussed about it in one of the previous questions about, you know, stresses of life and stuff and how you deal with it after recovery. Moving house and having a puppy is damn stressful. Like, it is, like when he's pooing in a kitchen and he's peeing on carpets and stuff, and you have to pick that up and clean that, you know, maybe 6-7 times a day. It's stressful, but life's good, man. It's good. Like, I see now the beauty in it too, you know. It's plus as well with the sort of routine and stuff that I've picked up as part of the recovery, in terms of, you know, the gym, walks, you know, looking after myself, trying to eat right, you know, that's a big thing. And yeah, and enjoying socializing and going out for drinks and stuff too. It's just brilliant. It is brilliant, but it wasn't without a lot of hard work and a lot of trial and error and a lot of, you know, one step forward, 2 steps back, what it felt like. But yeah, life is good. Life is good. Yeah. But again, it's, how do I put this? It's it was the result of going through that, as we've said, like in terms of finding the silver linings and stuff now. As before, I didn't really care about a lot of the trivial things of life, you know, the likes of like going for a walk, or the likes of, you know, going on a holiday because of the fear of flights and stuff like that. Like now, I love a walk. I love going on a holiday. You know, I'm looking up holidays and stuff to go on. That used to be my girlfriend. I'd be like, no, listen, we don't need to go anywhere. You know? I spent my money getting my eyes tested. We can't go anywhere. But
but if you want a free one, my voucher's nearly full. Like, you know, nine done. Like,
but yeah, recovery is it's how do I put this? Recovery is as long as you need it to be, if that makes sense. If you do the wrong things, like I done for so long, it'll feel like forever. But the more you do it, and the harder you work at it, it will come sooner than you think, you know. But yeah, life's good.
Yeah, that's great to hear, man. And also the fact that like you're doing the things that might have kind of scared you before, like flying. Like,
yeah,
you know, that's yeah. Has that kind of changed for you completely, or is it like is it just easier, the idea of kind of hopping on a plane now and going somewhere?
It's, before I used to like think about it like, I have to go on this plane, you know, I'm so scared to go on this plane. But now I look at it and go, right, okay, I won't like the plane. I think I'm too far gone of liking planes, but I now focus on all my attention on the destination rather than the journey, if that makes sense. So when we went to Nice, like I always looked at the beaches, looked at like the food and stuff. I was like, oh, I can't wait to get there. You know, that the plane sort of seemed like, you know, just a bit in between, which it is. Yeah. Whereas, you know, before all this, it just would have been like, oh, plane. Oh, I don't want to go on a plane, stuff like that. Well, that's not what I said. I might have a pint of Guinness or two before I go on a plane now, and just to just to settle a little bit in there. Yeah, I definitely rather than focus more on the destination rather than the journey now, which is good.
Yeah,
flying, you know, that's it.
Absolutely. I remember like when I was because I had like panic attacks on a plane. and a horrendous time when I was at the place that the plane went to. But I remember like this whole thing of like getting back into the headspace of being able to get on a plane again and thinking I was preparing for what I was going to do. And what I ended up doing was like, I'd get on a short flight, but I'd have like games loaded on my phone or podcasts, and I'd have my tablet with me, and I'd have like stuff downloaded off Netflix or whatever. So I'm going to watch a TV show or whatever. But it was this big plan of like, how am I going to distract myself from the plane while I'm on the plane, you know? And it helps. I mean, that's what helps. What I realized as I recovered was like, that's exactly what I used to do. Like, I mean, it's not like I used to get on a plane and just sit there and look at the Ryanair logo for like an hour and a half. Like, you know, of course I was reading books. I was listening to, I was like chatting. I was like, you know, but it's interesting that we kind of have these little obstacles of like, oh, I need to get back to what normality was. But like normality was just like, you were just reading a book. Like, you know, you were just, and then when you do that, the plane trip itself, or the, like for me, it was like the bus trip or the train or whatever, kind of gets relegated in the best possible way to being what it is, which is like it's a transition. It's literally just bringing you from A to B, and you can chill out. That's it. That's all it is. But we have a tendency to overcomplicate that whole thing during the period with anxiety. But that's great to hear. That's what it is for you now, and you can head down to the south of France and chill out for a while. You know.
Oh well,
because a ferry down there would be, man, you'd be ferry lagged for days.
Oh like. No. Well, the good thing is that's me done with boats now, man. No more.
So Keelan, there's going to be people watching this who are maybe going through what you went through back in Liverpool when this first started. What advice would you have for anyone going through DPDR at the moment?
For me, the big thing, obviously I can only talk from my experience, but them sort of forums and stuff and those like that there's a Reddit page of DPDR as well, and I was on that nearly every day. Get off that. Try and get into some sort of routine. There may be like people who don't like exercise as well. Like I'm not, you know, I'm not sitting shouting from the rooftops that you need to exercise, but at least something. You know, I'm not saying go to a gym or anything like that. You know, try and bench press, heavy weight, stuff like that. Go for a walk. You know, going for a bike ride, something like that, and getting into that sort of. The thing my doctor told me as well, whenever I told him that I wasn't exercising that much, he says, well, you're losing that sort of serotonin boost after you're finished with you're finished exercising. You might not even feel it. You may like, have to go for this stupid walk or this stupid bike ride, but it's so worth it. And in terms of like anything that sort of you haven't been doing because of the DPDR, try that sort of exposure therapy with it. Like for me, it was going into the city centre town. I couldn't do it. I thought I couldn't do it. And not gonna lie, the first 2 or 3 times I was like freaking out, you know, waiting for symptoms to appear. When they appeared, I freaked out and I wanted to go home. For a lot of times I did go home after that. But if you stick it out, it may very be uncomfortable, but you'll find it gets a little bit less uncomfortable, a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less, until eventually it's just like, you know, you walk down the stairs. You do that every day, you know. But yeah, the main thing is just to be, you're so strong. You don't know how strong you are, you know, like with the whole anxiety thing, it's sort of, it makes you feel like you're the weakest person in the world in that aspect. But you're not, you know, and it's just the mental strength that you have. Everybody has it, and you can really get over it that way. But
yeah, that's great advice. I think that's interesting what you say as well, Keelan, about, you know, going to town and then the next time it gets a little bit better, it gets a little bit better, it gets a little bit better, and that's like, that is absolutely what to expect with recovery. But you can like, you can bet the farm on it. Like, you know, you can set your watch to that. It gets a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. Because I think what we often, like the mistake that we make when we're recovering is that we think that we tend to think of recovery from anxiety as like trying to find a light switch. So there's a light switch here somewhere, and if I read enough about this, and if I research this enough, and if I can combine this Reddit post with this YouTube video, put them together, and but all I need to do is figure this out. Once I find the light switch, and I'm back to normal, and then I'm grand. But I will not stop until I find that light switch. It's got to be out there somewhere.
Yeah.
But what you realize is that, like, it's not that. It's like any anxiety-based condition, any thought-based condition is essentially a habit of thought, and it's a spectrum, and it's going up and down, but it's changeable, it's reducible, and you can completely reduce it and stop it over time. But the way that you do that is by changing your behavior. So it's by going out into town, even though you feel a bit anxious. And then when you come back, your brain says, okay, that anxiety wasn't necessary, and it drops down a little bit. Then you go to the gym, and then after an hour in the gym, your brain says, I don't know, probably a bit of anxiety there. And you say, no, I'm going to do that extra half hour. And then you come home, and then your brain says, okay, that wasn't necessary, and it drops down another bit. And then you keep doing that. And then the days start to arrive where you realize at the end of the day that you didn't think about it at all because it wasn't relevant to you. It wasn't relevant to you going to town or going to the gym or moving into a house or getting a puppy. It wasn't relevant to any of that stuff. It was, but it happened while you were looking in the other direction and living your life as if you felt no anxiety whatsoever, because that's what communicates to your brain that you don't need anxiety.
Yeah.
Keelan, it has been such a pleasure talking to you, man. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you so much for being on the channel, for sharing your insights and your experience. I know there's going to be people watching this who find this super helpful. I found it super helpful. And man, I need to start hitting the gym more. Like, I mean, I need to do that extra half hour. Like, I've been cutting out early, like, you know.
Yeah. No skipping, no skipping.
No skipping, man. No skipping. You spot me, you will.
Yeah, well. But yeah, Sean, thank you so much for having me on, man. From the moment go, whenever I first seen your videos and stuff, like, I don't think, and maybe you do, but I don't know if you fully understand the sort of the gravitas of the way you're helping people. I mean, there's probably like a million other people that watch your videos and that maybe I don't reach out to you, you know, but you've helped them get through it, and you're just a blessing. So thank you so much, and thank you for having me on.
That's so kind of you to say, man. I really appreciate that. And I'm delighted that you've recovered. Enjoy your life post-recovery. Enjoy the new gaff. Enjoy the puppy. and if you are ever down in Cork or Kerry, give me a shout because we're going for a pint, okay?
Okay, will do, mate. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, man. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.